powerful winter storm has crippled New York and much of the U.S. Northeast, leaving streets narrowed to single lanes by snowbanks, bridges coated in ice, and commuter rail corridors forced into partial shutdown. In dense neighborhoods, plows and salt trucks move block by block, while in hill towns and rural corridors, drifting snow and downed trees have cut off entire stretches of roadway. Officials now say 22 people have died, and the disruption is being compounded by widespread utility failures. Across the United States, roughly 350,000 customers remain without power, a figure that has shifted hour by hour as crews restore service and new outages appear. The storm's immediate danger is not confined to snowfall totals alone. It is the overlap of snow, sleet, freezing rain, and sustained cold that turns a weather event into a multi-day emergency. Reuters. In New York, snowfall was significant enough to push some communities into prolonged cleanup operations, especially in the lower Hudson Valley and parts of the interior Northeast, where totals reached well into double digits. Local reporting in the New York metro area also documented a daily record in Manhattan, 11.4 inches in Central Park, the most ever recorded there for that calendar date. CBS News. Meanwhile, the storm's national footprint has been reflected in aviation data. Reuters reported more than 11,000 U.S. flights canceled on one of the peak travel disruption days, with airports serving major metropolitan areas, including New York, seeing extremely high cancellation percentages. Reuters. And while snow in the Northeast has been the most visible symbol, the power outage burden has often been driven by ice, particularly where freezing rain added enough weight to bring down branches and transmission lines. Reuters. Meteorologists describe the storm as dangerous because it combined several winter hazards in sequence: snow bands that reduced visibility, sleet and freezing rain that created a hard glaze over roads and sidewalks, and then an Arctic air mass that locked temperatures below freezing, preventing rapid melting and increasing the risk of refreezing. The National Weather Service and emergency managers repeatedly emphasized the compound nature of the hazard: heavy precipitation first, then prolonged cold. Reuters described the storm as a paralyzing mix stretching from the Ohio Valley and Mid-South to New England, compounded by bitter Arctic cold. The mechanics are familiar to forecasters. A low-pressure system draws in moist air, precipitation intensifies, and if a cold layer remains near the surface, rain can freeze on contact, creating ice accretion that is far more damaging to power systems than snow alone. Ice does not need hurricane winds to cause destruction. It simply adds weight until limbs snap and lines collapse. Reuters reported freezing rain depositing ice layers up to an inch thick in some southern areas during the storm's broader sweep, illustrating the kind of loading that utilities fear most. In New York, officials warned residents to avoid unnecessary travel during heavy snowfall rates, because reduced visibility and rapid accumulation can outpace plow cycles, especially when winds sweep dry, powdery snow back across cleared lanes. In the Northeast, the storm's impacts were uneven, an expected pattern in major winter events. Snow totals can swing dramatically within a few miles, depending on band placement, elevation, and proximity to coastlines. In New York City, Central Park recorded 11.4 inches, a daily record for that date, while the broader region saw double-digit totals become quite common, according to local reporting. CBS News. In the interior of the region, impacts were often amplified. CBS News documented a snow totals map showing Napanoch, New York at 30.0 inches, with multiple Hudson Valley and suburban locations exceeding 17 inches. Across the wider U.S. footprint, Reuters reported that some of the heaviest snowfall measured since the storm developed included 1 foot or more in parts of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, underscoring how the Northeast was only one segment of a much larger corridor of severe winter weather. This geographic spread matters because it shapes how quickly communities can recover. In cities, plows can stage at depots and rotate crews. In rural and mountainous regions, a handful of blocked roads can isolate residents, delaying emergency response and power restoration. The human toll, 22 dead, reflects how winter storms kill in multiple ways, often long after the heaviest snow has stopped falling. One major driver is hypothermia and exposure, especially when individuals are stranded outdoors, lack stable shelter, or lose power and heat. National reporting has described deaths linked to hypothermia in several states during the broader storm event, underscoring how cold becomes lethal when it lasts long enough and removes basic protection. A second driver is transportation trauma. crashes on ice, vehicles sliding off elevated roadways, and multi-car collisions when visibility collapses in heavy snow. Even when roads are treated, the transition from snow to sleet can erase traction unexpectedly, particularly on bridges and overpasses. A third driver, often overlooked, is medical emergencies triggered by physical strain, including cardiac events during snow removal. New York's own leadership warned residents against overexertion during shoveling, emphasizing safer techniques and smaller loads to reduce risk. The storm also puts pressure on people who are already vulnerable: older residents, children, those with chronic illness, and communities with limited access to transportation or reliable heating. When temperatures remain below freezing for days, the consequences of even a short power interruption grow more severe. The storm's defining infrastructure vulnerability has been the electrical grid and the cascading effects of outages, loss of heat, interrupted communications, and disrupted supply chains. Reuters reported that more than 800,000 customers were without power at one point nationally, as ice toppled limbs and transmission lines. Outages later fluctuated as restoration progressed and new damage emerged. This is the context in which current estimates of about 350,000 still without power remain plausible as a post-peak snapshot during the recovery phase. Reuters. In New York, state officials emphasized preparations and the scale of resources positioned ahead of the storm. Thousands of transportation operators, plow trucks, loaders, and 24/7 staffing. The goal is not only snow removal, but keeping primary routes open for ambulances, utility trucks, and emergency supply deliveries. Transportation systems also absorbed major impacts. In the New York metro area, rail and bus operations faced interruptions and phased restoration. CBS News documented NJ transit resuming in stages after system-wide suspension. In the air, the disruption became national. Reuters reported major carriers canceling over 11,000 flights on Sunday and described airports serving New York as among those with very high cancellation rates. Government response has centered on emergency declarations, resource deployment, and cold weather protection for vulnerable residents. Governor Kathy Hochul issued a state of emergency ahead of the storm, citing the combination of extreme cold and heavy snowfall potential across multiple regions, including New York City, Long Island, the Hudson Valley, and upstate corridors. The announcement also described the danger of being stranded in sub-freezing conditions and urged residents to limit travel. Reuters also reported that Hochul mobilized National Guard troops in New York City, Long Island, and the Hudson Valley as part of the storm response. Reuters. The state's response plan included transportation, staffing levels, and equipment counts, an operational detail that matters because it sets the ceiling on how quickly lanes can be reopened and how fast emergency vehicles can move. At the city level, the response has included warming centers, shelter operations during code blue conditions, and advisories aimed at preventing cold exposure and carbon monoxide poisoning from improper heating methods. In New York City, the storm is being measured both against headline totals and against its timing and impacts. Central Park's 11.4 inches represented a daily record for that specific date, according to local reporting, an indicator that, while the storm may not rival the city's all-time snowfall records, it still stands out in the modern observational record. Historically, the most disruptive storms in the Northeast are not always those with the highest snowfall totals. The most damaging events often combine heavy snow with sleet and freezing rain because ice drives prolonged outages and slows restoration. Reuters underscored that dynamic by emphasizing widespread power failures tied to freezing rain and heavy ice loading on infrastructure. There is also a broader historical marker visible in the aviation disruptions. Reuters described the cancellation wave as extraordinary in scale, reflecting how winter storms can still overwhelm modern logistics when they span too many regions at once. This storm reveals a familiar reality. Winter disasters are rarely a single moment of impact. They're a chain reaction. Snow reduces mobility. Ice damages grids. Power loss removes heat. Cold then turns the outage into a public safety emergency, especially for people without stable housing, without backup heat, or without the ability to travel for supplies. New York's emergency posture, declaring a state of emergency, positioning transportation resources, and mobilizing the National Guard, shows how governments try to compress response time before conditions deteriorate. But the storm also demonstrates how quickly even robust systems can be strained when impacts span multiple regions at once. disrupting aviation networks and pulling mutual aid resources in many directions simultaneously. The key lesson is preparedness that matches the real risk profile. Not only shovels and plows, but backup heat planning, clear public messaging on travel and exposure, and targeted outreach for people most likely to be harmed by cold and power loss. For residents, the practical takeaway remains consistent with official guidance. Limit travel during peak conditions, avoid overexertion during cleanup, treat down power lines as live, and check on neighbors who may be isolated. In the Northeast, recovery is now measured in restored circuits, cleared lanes, reopened transit schedules, and fewer emergency calls, while forecasters continue watching the next system that could arrive before the region fully stabilizes.